And welcome back to another tutorial on law, and here we're going to talk about some of the legal wording, and then we'll talk about national standards as well. So let's just begin, and I'd like to clarify what the words mean when we say so far as is reasonably practicable. So you might have seen that quite a few times in the ILO convention. The employers must ensure so far as is reasonably practicable the workplace machinery, equipment, process is safe, and so on. So what we have in law is what we call a hierarchy of duties. We have two types of duty. We have absolute duties and we have qualified duties. An absolute duty usually has the word shall in it, and not much else. So it's you shall carry out risk assessments. You shall carry out research. You shall report accidents. When you have the shall followed by whatever it is, you shall do this, it means that you shall do it with no exceptions. There's no excuses for failure here. Failure is not an option. If you've ever seen the movie Apollo 13, failure is not an option. It's an absolute duty, it has to be done. So you shall do it. Now, some duties are not absolute. Many duties are actually qualified. They're qualified by another phrase that comes after. You shall do this if. You shall do this so far as. You shall do this but. And so we have this phrase, so far as is reasonably practicable. So it's what they call qualified. It's like there's a criteria. You got to do it, but only if you meet this condition, only to this extent. It gives you a bit of flexibility. It gives you some excuses for failure. Well, we'd made it as safe as we reasonably could, but we couldn't go any further. Someone got hurt, we've done everything we reasonably could. We haven't done everything. Thankfully, we are not required to do everything. Can you imagine if we had a law that said you shall keep people safe? No ifs, no buts. You would not have a job. I wouldn't have a job. There wouldn't be any jobs. The most absolute way of keeping people safe is to just not do anything. That in itself is not very safe because you'd starve, wouldn't you? You'd just die. Poverty. It's not a good idea. So we've got these two duties, absolute duties and qualified duties. Now, the most qualified duties are one of these two phrases. The most common one is so far as is reasonably practicable. There is another one which is so far as is practicable. You may encounter that. The only difference is that it doesn't have the word reasonably in it. Now, what's the difference? Well, I'm going to explain in a moment what reasonably practicable means. But this so far as is practicable means you must comply with it if it is technologically possible. Given the current state of technology, the current state of knowledge, not your knowledge, not the world's knowledge, is it possible to achieve this? Here in the UK, we have a duty to prevent access to the dangerous parts of machines. So I say dangerous part of machines, could be the electrics, could be the moving parts, the wheels, the cogs, the rollers. We have a duty to prevent access to those so far as is practicable. It means that we have to do everything that is technologically possible to stop fingers from getting in there. Which means if somebody invents a new, better technology, like some kind of sensor, some kind of light curtain, some kind of light beam, something that can scan my genetics and say, oh look, that's a human, I'll turn it off. Yeah, some crazy technology, it means we are legally required to install that. Yeah, and the cost doesn't matter. Cost, time, effort, disruption, doesn't matter. You got to do it. That's what so far as is practicable means. Now, what does so far as is reasonably practicable means? Well, it means that we are allowed to compare the benefits of doing this versus the cost, time, and effort. So there's a little bit of a cost-benefit analysis here. I'll explain that more precisely in a moment, but first let's do an exercise. I'm going to give you a series of duties. Could you please tell me if this is an absolute duty or a qualified duty? So the first one was qualified. It said employers shall be required so far as is reasonably practicable. Okay, so straight away, that's qualified. There's you shall do it if. The next one was about cooperation, and that was an absolute duty. It said cooperation between workers and managers shall be an essential element of, and there was nothing else really. It shall be an essential element. That's an absolute. No ifs, no buts. It has to be done. The final one was to give necessary instructions and training taking account of the functions and capacities of different categories of workers. If you're watching this and you're a NEBOSH student, did you know that you have a ton of resources on the Compassa website which you can use? Many of them are very, very cheap. You've got our YouTube section here, loads of free advice here, but if you want some study books, if you want exam technique documents, exam technique guides, instructions on how to do your NG2 or IG2 practical project, you can download those at some very, very reasonable prices from our website. And if you wanted hands-on tutor support with full access to all of our tutorials, guides, me and my colleagues at the tips of your fingers, consider signing up for our NEBOSH Rescue package. You'll get access to our full course and tutor support at a heavily discounted rate. And, well, frankly, you'll struggle to find pass rates that are as consistently high anywhere else. Let's get back to the advice. Now, that is an absolute duty. You shall give the necessary training. Now, you could argue that the word necessary qualifies it a bit. Oh, okay, if you want to think it through very precisely, I guess you might have a point there. So the training shall only be given if it's necessary. Okay, it's kind of qualified, but the training shall be provided. No ifs, no buts. It's like necessary training shall be provided. Cost, time, effort, doesn't matter. So it's actually kind of absolute, isn't it? Let's get into what so far as is reasonably practicable really means. This can be quite complex. We've got whole court cases in the UK that have debated this, that have explained this. Imagine that you have a risk. Your duty is to reduce that risk to ensure the health and safety of people so far as is reasonably practicable. So let's say the risk is a manual handling risk. There's a risk of back injuries. People are handling these boxes or something, yeah? And you are considering how we should make this task safe. So there's a few different things you can do. One of those things might be to provide some kind of lifting equipment, some kind of crane, something to handle the boxes and eliminate the manual handling. Now, all of that has a cost, and all of that might have a benefit as well. What we're required to do is to compare the benefits of installing the crane. So the benefits means how much does this reduce the risk by? And compare those benefits versus the cost, time and effort. Now, this is a very subjective calculation. It's very subjective because, well, how do you calculate the risk? It's very subjective. We'll talk about that later when we do risk assessment, but how do you calculate risk? It's just my opinion as to what the risk is or what the benefit is. So straight away we have a problem there. We can calculate the cost, sure, but difficult to calculate the benefits. But let's just say that we have assessed this manual handling task and the risk is currently high. High risk of back injuries. We're having loads of back injuries, risk is high. This device will significantly reduce that risk because it practically eliminates the need to do any manual handling. Workers are very likely to use it because it's much easier. So how much does it reduce the risk by? Well, it reduces the risk a lot. So the benefits of doing it are very high. Big benefit. Now, we compare that big benefit to the cost, time, and effort. Now, if the cost, time, and effort are grossly disproportionate to the benefits of this device, then it's not a reasonable thing to do. So if the cost, time, and effort of this device is it's like massive, and far bigger, way over the top compared to the benefits, then it's not a reasonable thing to do. But actually, if the costs are less than the benefits, or if the costs are just a bit more than the benefits, maybe it's just a little bit more, or maybe quite a bit more, but it's not like massively more, it's still a reasonable thing to do. Now that's something to kind of get your head across. This is not a traditional cost-benefit analysis. Spend £1,000 to save £1,000. It's not one of those. It's like, we shall spend more time, more effort, more money to control this risk. Why? Because this is not just a financial argument, it's a moral duty. Is it reasonable to spend more than you need to reduce this risk? Yes it is. Spend more than you need to, but not massive amounts more than is needed. Yeah, so there's a limit. If the cost is grossly disproportionate, it's not a reasonable thing to do. Now let's take a same situation, not same situation, different situation, but still a manual handling situation. Let's imagine that somebody is picking up a laptop from their desk. Very simple activity. I've got a laptop here, pick it up from my desk. Right, look how easy that is. My laptop. It's very light, I'm capable, I'm trained, it's not a complicated task, but it's still manual handling. There is still a risk of injury. People do sometimes, rarely, they do sometimes injure themselves picking up laptops from desks. The risk is very small. Now we could, in theory, install a crane above my desk to help me pick up my laptop. But how much does that reduce the risk by? Well, there's a question for you. Let's just throw that one in there. How much would a crane reduce the risk of me injuring myself picking up the laptop? Obviously, it's not going to reduce the risk by a lot. Now, you might think it does because, oh, it eliminates the risk. Yes, I know, but the risk was tiny to begin with. The risk was tiny to begin with. Therefore, the benefits must be tiny. And if the benefits are tiny, well, let's compare it to the cost of the crane. It's enormous compared to the benefits, isn't it? That would be a grossly disproportionate cost compared to the benefits. Now, just because the crane is grossly disproportionate doesn't mean that you are free to do nothing. No. What about other things? Can you provide a trolley? Can you provide training? Can you put a little sticker on the laptop warning me that that it's heavy or something? There might be other things that you could do. There might be a combination of things you could do. So you might be able to give trolleys, gloves, and some training. And then if you take all of those measures, you say, right, how much does that reduce the risk by? And it might not be as effective as a crane, but it might reduce the risk quite a lot. Quite a bit. Not as much as the crane, but quite a bit. And those measures are way, way, way cheaper than a crane. The training's not that expensive, gloves are not that expensive. Get them a few trolleys, barrows, yeah, several £1,000s were done. Way cheaper than a big £20,000, $50,000 crane or whatever it is. So now we can compare that smaller cost versus the smaller benefits, and we see that the small cost is proportionate to those smaller benefits, which means, what does it mean? It means that you are legally required to do it. This is the key thing. It's like, if a control is reasonably practicable, you are legally required to do it. You must do it. It's not like optional. Oh, we could do that. Yeah, that's a reasonable thing to do, but we're not going to do that. No, that's not how it works at all. If it's a reasonably practicable thing to do, and you are legally required to do everything reasonably practicable, to go so far as is reasonably practicable, it means you must do it. There we are. Now, in all of this is super subjective, isn't it? Super subjective. What's the benefit of risk? I don't know what the benefit of risk is. It's just my opinion. So how do you know what is actually reasonable or not? And this is where guidance comes in super useful. So actually, what is a reasonable thing? You'll notice here, it says at the bottom of this slide, compliance with the relevant ACOP is deemed to be doing everything reasonably practicable. Now, here in the UK, we have a system of approved codes of practice. They are published by our enforcement agency, and they're super useful because if we comply with that code of practice, we are considered to be doing everything we reasonably can. So we don't have to do this whole silly equation of benefits versus cost. Now, you are not in the UK probably, so you have a different system, you have your own national legislation, your own national enforcement body. There might be sources of official guidance. You might have your enforcement agency website, which gives you your own codes of practice, your own guidance documents. You might have leaflets and websites and things like that. Or maybe just the inspector tells you, this is what you should be doing. Is it reasonable to do what the inspector says you should be doing? Please answer me that question. Well, of course it's reasonable to do what the inspector says you should be doing, most of the time, unless your inspector's corrupt, of course. It does happen sometimes. So do what the inspectors say, do what the guidance says, and hopefully you're doing everything you reasonably can. Now, you might also have courts. Courts will make decisions and they will say this company is liable for an injury because they failed to do this, they failed to do that. Those decisions, if you can read them, because they do publish them, then they might tell you what is a reasonable thing to do. So for example, we have the hazard of stress, mental health and stress. Back in the 1990s, there was no guidance on stress. We didn't know what to do with stress. And one day there was a stress compensation claim. It went to court, and the courts decided that it would be reasonable to provide some kind of confidential counseling system to employees who had gone off sick with stress. They decided that was a thing. In the 1990s, all industries had to suddenly arrange these counseling hotlines where you could ring up and say, hey, I'm stressed. And that was a reason. It wasn't very effective. It didn't really work, didn't do much good. But the court said that's a reasonable thing to do. Okay, so we had to do it then. You might also have other sources, other professional bodies like IOSH or ISO or insurance companies or trade associations. So for example, you might have things like IPAF, the International Platform Access Federation, I think it is. They might have various guidance documents on how you should manage certain hazards. So on that note, what I would like you to do is, using the power of Google, is go find a code of practice or a guidance document which you think applies to you. Okay, well, let's take a quick look at that. So here I am, Google. Now you have to be careful with this. Don't just choose random websites, random blogs. Right? Don't use the Compassa site. Right? We're not a recognized authority. We're a training provider, sure, but we're not the government. We're not a trade body. It's just our opinion. Go to government regulators, big international organizations, credible, recognized authorities like the International Labour Organization, ISO, maybe OSHA in the United States. So for example, if you were in the United States, you could search something like OSHA confined spaces, and you might find some guidance here around confined spaces. So you can look through this website, and maybe you'll have, say, the additional resources. So you've got all kinds of guidance documents here. If you were working in, say, Nigeria, spell it correctly, Nigeria. Now I'm just searching random here, but Nigeria, Code of Practice, construction safety. Let's see if we can find anything for Nigeria. Oh, what's this? So an ACOP approved code of practice. Oh wow, okay, so there's something there. So if you're in Nigeria, that might apply to you. If you were, say, in India, we could say a code of practice safety in the farming sector. Well, we found the ILO code of practice, which is pretty useful there, so we can take a look at that. Oh, the ILO website's still broken, but I'm sure we can find it somewhere else. So that's super useful when deciding what is a reasonable thing to do, and also super useful for your NEBOSH practical projects, because you might have to make recommendations on, here are the things we should do to keep the workplace safe. And they shouldn't just be based on your opinion, it should also be based on the authorities and what they think is the standard that you should be aiming towards. I hope that was useful. I think we are now done for law, thank goodness. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. We're done for the law, mostly.